Story 1. I don't remember what they were called, but those 1940s skyscraper ironworkers you see dozens of stories above the street sitting, eating, and laughing. I would have passed out after the second floor. Story 2. I worked in a nursing home kitchen while in high school. That experience was difficult, and I could never be a nursing aide to the residents. I would not be able to provide 1,000th of the care they deserve. Nursing homes are very depressing. Story 3. I was the person who had to tell people that their health insurance did not cover something. A few years ago, when I had a really bad job and was looking for almost anything else, I applied to a company for a different role. They said I was not a good fit for the position I had applied for, but offered an interview for this other role. I declined. As someone with a chronic illness that is expensive to treat, I could not be on the other side of that interaction and live with myself. Story 4. A detective investigating sexual assault cases involving children. Story 5. Anything in which I harm animals or profit from the suffering of others. Story 6. I found this out personally. I worked as a lenderside foreclosure litigation attorney. In plain English, that is the asshole lawyer who helps a bank foreclose on property. I didn't last 3 weeks. I didn't care how good the money was. It felt extremely dirty, as if I needed to volunteer at a poverty clinic to save my soul. Story 7. If you worked in a slaughterhouse every day, your heart would have to die. Story 8. An insurance adjuster or other decision maker may deny coverage. I cannot imagine being in a position where I was employed to prevent people from getting the help they need or where there was a strong incentive not to pay them. Story 9. Anything that involves heavy labor. Working with children with special needs. Story 10. Social worker or a role at an animal rescue. Seeing injured, abused, and neglected children and animals would be too much for me to handle. Story 11. As a teacher, I would be fine if the children were well behaved. But honestly, with the way children are these days, I think I would constantly lose my composure. Story 12. I am flipping a sign for a cash advance business while wearing a chicken suit on a busy street in the middle of August. 8 hours a day at minimum wage. If I end up in hell and it is customized, that is the job I will be assigned. Eternal sign flipping without wages or breaks. Story 13. Drug dealer. People hit you up at 2 a.m. on a Friday night. Just go to bed. You do not need any afters, buddy. You are 40 with kids. Story 14. I work as a social worker in Child Protective Services. I am not paid enough for what I have to see. Story 15. I am autistic and my sensory sensitivity is to odors. I cannot tolerate anything with strong smells. There are very few exceptions. I cannot stand it when smells I enjoy are too strong. Story 16. After I lost an insurance job, I ended up in a debt collector's office. I completed 5 days of training and quit an hour before I was scheduled to start. I could not spend my day tracking people down and hounding them about medical debt. Story 17. Police officer. I would be a total asshole to most, if not all, people I pull over, chase, or arrest. Story 18. Because I am autistic, I am drawn to anything related to people and hospitality. Weirdly enough, I work very well with dementia patients and so on. Story 19. I am open to working in most specialties, but I would never want to work in the emergency room. Story 20. Cleaning sewers would be an impossible job for me. Story 21. Working in a slaughterhouse has to be the worst, most soul-destroying job. Story 22. The service industry. I am very introverted and cannot keep a smiling face all day. Story 23. When I was a waiter, I kept dropping plates and glasses. Story 24. My brother is a firefighter. It is definitely not for me. There is too much time away from home, too much drama, and calls that are emotionally and physically demanding. Story 25. Contortionist. I could probably do that job exactly once. Story 26. Eye surgeon. I cannot even watch another person put contact lenses in, let alone wear them myself. So cutting people's eyes is definitely out of the question. Story 27. Social worker. Factory assembly line worker performing repetitive tasks. 911 operator. Special needs caregiver. I am grateful there are people in this world who are willing and able to do all these things. Story 28. Working with seriously ill children, I would be an emotional wreck. Story 29. Nurses, bless them for what they are able to do. There is no way I could clean up an adult's feces without vomiting on the patient. Story 30. Judging by my employment record, most of them, apparently. Story 31. Body broker is a term that refers to two occupations I do not want to be involved in. In the first, a person receives referral payments for convincing people with substance use disorders who have health insurance to go to questionable rehabilitation facilities. The second is even more grotesque. It is the trade in bodies and body parts for training, research, and related uses. Depending on how it is conducted, it may be legal or illegal. In either case, I do not want any part of it. Story 32. Debt collector. Imagine the kind of person you have to be to call and hound poor people for money all day. Story 33. Actuarial work in mathematics, statistics, and business is light years away from my skill set. Story 34. The person who has to clean out portable toilets after a music festival does not get paid anywhere near what they deserve. Story 35. My partner has been a special needs teacher for over 20 years, and I don't know how they do it. They are spat on, head-butted, stomped on, and must deal with urine and feces daily. I could not do it. Story 36. School bus driver, teacher, etc. Sure, some kids are nice. Then I remember myself at that age. Oh no. Story 37. I am a receptionist. I am an introvert, and I freeze up when the phone rings or when people come to the office. I am fully remote now. Thank you, Jesus. Story 38. I have worked in retail, but food service seems much worse. Story 39. Working as a deli slicer involves non-stop demands from customers, especially in busy locations, and you end up with one arm stronger than the other. Story 40. Surgeon, listen. It is the guts, the risk, and my shaky hands. Oil worker. I am not going to be on a platform for most of the year. Story 41. As a bus driver, whether the passengers are children or adults, it doesn't matter. I have zero patience for that. Story 42. Anything to do with dealing with the public. I would not last a day before tossing a Karen out the door. Story 43. I am a dental hygienist. I have a thing where if I see saliva it makes me want to vomit. I dry heaved during the scene in Titanic when Jack and Rose were spitting over the side of the ship. I almost vomited just remembering it. I do not know how people do that job without vomiting into a patient's open mouth. Story 44. I could never be a famous actor. I do think it is an important job. Without actors, we would not have movies, shows, or plays. I could not do the acting because I cannot act differently from how I feel. I could not do the famous part because I am a major introvert with sensory issues, and standing in front of a bunch of flashing lights would be hell. I could not live that way. Story 45. Secondary or primary education. Children are exhausting, and neither the school administration nor most parents want to do anything about them. Story 46. The waitstaff pick up and handle plates containing leftover food. A gag at the thought. Story 47. Surrogacy or sperm donation. I cannot live in a world where I have children I cannot hold or watch grow up. Story 48. Someone who reviews content on social platforms that has been flagged for terms of service violations spends 8 hours a day, 5 days a week looking at gore, racism, child pornography, and so on. It would be extremely depressing. Story 49. Anything medical. If what should be inside of you is outside of you, then I will be far away from you. Massive high fives to those who can handle that. Story 50. I am a roofer, especially in Florida where I live. It gets well over 100 degrees up there. Story 51. Cave rescue. Crawling through cracks and getting stuck. Story 52. High-rise window washing. That shit looks treacherous as fuck. Story 53. Dentists for so many reasons. I am not afraid of them, by the way. Story 54. A funeral home, no. Being downstairs and preparing a body is a big no for me. I would probably die. Story 55. Anything medical involves sick people. Are you saying I will get sick just by being in the same room? Cure yourself. Story 56. Doctors and nurses in hospitals deserve all the money in the world and great respect. Story 57. It must be soul-destroying for people in the insurance industry to have to find ways to deny coverage. Story 58. I avoid work involving dangerous or heavy machinery, such as certain manufacturing jobs. If a mistake could cost me a limb, I want to be 1,000,000 feet away. Story 59. I would love to work as a nurse and help people in the medical field, but I have an intense fear of anyone vomiting. I have severe emetophobia. Story 60. High-pressure sales or any job that requires lying. Story 61. I avoid anything that requires dealing with vomit on a regular basis. Even taking care of it for my children was very challenging and made me want to cry and run away. Story 62. I could never get used to the smell of cleaning septic systems. Story 63. Custodian. I am very germophobic about bathrooms. I appreciate those who can and admire their efforts, but I could not. Story 64. A lineman works on high-tension power lines that are never turned off. I would never climb onto a live power line to perform maintenance. Story 65. Call center representative. Callers can be so vicious over the phone. I don't know how they do it. Story 66. I am afraid of heights and start shaking after climbing 2 rungs of a ladder. Story 67. Customer service. I would get fired the second someone said, "Let me speak to your manager." Story 68. I just couldn't be a debt collector knowing how broke people are, especially if it was for medical bills. Story 69. I work as a call center employee. Phone calls cause me severe anxiety. I could barely handle taking calls during jobs I have held for years. Making calls for personal matters gives me so much anxiety that I postpone scheduling and rescheduling appointments indefinitely. Story 70. I would never turn my hobbies into careers because I would end up hating them in the end. For example, I love to cook, but I would hate it if I worked in a restaurant. I love taking long drives, but I would hate it if I were a truck driver. I love making music, but I would hate it if I had a record deal. Story 71. Anything on a cruise ship? No, thank you. I worked in hotels for a decade, and the idea of that level of hospitality work being inescapable is not for me. At least I got to go home after my shifts. Story 72. Being a cult leader would be fun for the first day. After that, absolutely not. Story 73. I truly acknowledge that the work of defense attorneys is important for a fair justice system, but lying and misrepresenting facts to try to get a guilty person out of jail is not something I could do for a living. Story 74. Waitressing for that many people and remembering that many orders would make me cry. My short-term memory is poor. Story 75. I would rather deal with emo teenagers and their negative attitude than with anything involving young children. Story 76. I do not want anything to do with babies or children. I do not like them and would not want to work with them. Story 77. Child care. I cannot stand any children other than my own. I do not know how my wife does it. Story 78. Railroad engineers should not stop the train and walk a mile or so back to determine what they struck, especially if it was a person. Absolutely not. Story 79. I couldn't be a cop. A family member was a dispatcher and would come home telling me about the calls. There is no way I wouldn't just lose it and want to retaliate against someone who abused a child. Story 80. I dislike working in an office. The harsh fluorescent lighting, cubicle space, and constant noise. The culture is toxic and I despise office parties. Give me a computer, let me work from home, and I will be your best employee. Do not ever shove me into an office. Story 81. This came up before and I had never thought about it until someone mentioned it, but I could absolutely never work in a slaughterhouse. It is not because I think I am morally superior, but because I know my own limits and boundaries, and I would be so permanently traumatized that I do not think I could function afterward. Story 82. I can't wrap my head around large construction projects. I don't know how to manage them. Story 83. A waiter or server. I would find it tiring to communicate with people all day as an introvert. Story 84. A law enforcement official has to review child sexual exploitation material evidence. It is easily the worst job on earth. Story 85. There are many reasons. If you mean I cannot because I would be terrible at it, the reasons are many. If you mean because it is immoral, the reasons are also many. If you mean it is beneath me, as long as it is not immoral, it is not beneath me. I also have zero confidence in myself. I have been known to take on jobs no one wants or to stay in dead-end jobs and toxic environments partly because of that. Story 86. Used car sales. I am pretty sure I would be putting a hose in the exhaust pipe of one of those beaters by the end of the first week. Story 87. Many things, especially anything related to healthcare. Story 88. I could not be a manager. The higher up the chain I went, the less able or willing I would be to do the job. I could not be the champion of profitability, policies, or discipline at a company. I do not care. If it were my own business, that would be different, but I would never run a business with employees. Story 89. A 911 operator. The traumatic things they have to hear and stay calm through. I couldn't handle it. Story 90. Hospice and memory care nursing are challenging. I get frustrated enough with older people just trying to work a cash register, so I know I would never be able to do their job. Story 91. I have trauma responses to people with developmental disabilities, so I react strongly to anything involving these kinds of cases. By developmental disabilities, I mean more severe conditions. I am fine with dyslexia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, mild learning disorders, and similar conditions, but the issue begins when it involves people who would need special education classes or different programs. I know this is a strange thing to have a trauma response to, and I feel guilty about it. Story 92. I cannot handle bodily fluids or bathroom care, so I should not work in nursing or caregiver roles. I become easily irritated by children, so I should not work in roles involving childcare. I am not suited for laborer roles because I cannot tolerate extreme heat or cold. Story 93. I could not do most things. Physical work, jobs that required frequent travel, teaching, science, mathematics, engineering, health-related roles, or a traditional 9-to-5 job. Story 94. I could never be a waiter. I cannot remember anything people tell me, and writing orders down is apparently considered unprofessional now. I would mess up every order. Story 95. Caregiver. I am sorry. I have a nearly impossible time trying to be nice on demand. Not that I am cruel. Showing care when someone needs it is not a quality I have. I could be on the spectrum, as some relatives have suggested. Story 96. My first thought was anything involving public speaking. I would just crumble. But you all are suggesting so many other good ones. I will also add anything involving hurting animals. Slaughterhouses and animal research come to mind. Story 97. I have said it hundreds of times. I was homeless for 4 years. I will shovel puppies into a furnace before I let that happen again. Story 98. Probably anything that has to work in direct sunlight. Story 99. A teacher? Fuck that. Underpaid and underappreciated. Especially in today's world of cancel culture, one wrong poster, flag, or sticker and you're accused of grooming children and fired. Story 100. Repetitive physical labor would be unbearable for me. My brain, severely affected by attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, would implode, and I could not endure it. Story 101. I see. I refuse to be the cause of someone else's suffering. Story 102. Working in a call center. I do not even like talking to my friends or family on the phone. I cannot imagine dealing with angry or confused customers all day. Story 103. Child trafficking. Yes, I am looking at you, orange turd. Release the Epstein files. Story 104. Plumber, garbage collector, surgeon, shepherd, farmhand, sanitation worker, proctologist, urologist, veterinarian, first responder, mortician, forensic pathologist, professional competitive eater, janitor, and any job at Taco Bell. Story 105. Well, I lasted 1.5 hours at a company where my job was to cold call people and ask for money for various charities. Story 106. As a nurse, I would not put up with patients being anything other than dying or pleasant. Story 107. I am a former corrections officer with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I will never do that job again. The pay was poor. I worked 10 to 12 hours a day, responding to suicide calls and enduring bodily fluids thrown at me, with the constant smell and taste of pepper spray. Story 108. Telemarketing for something unethical or fraudulent. I absolutely hate making cold calls to potential clients in the industry, let alone calling someone who would never welcome your call. Story 109. Sewage treatment. I have obsessive-compulsive disorder, and being that close to untold gallons of human waste, viruses, and bacteria makes me feel panicked. It almost gives me a panic attack just thinking about it. Story 110. I could not work as a garbage collector. The smell alone would overwhelm me. I have great respect for anyone who can do that work, including my uncle who drives the trucks. Also, I cannot work in a regular bakery, pizzeria, or an establishment such as Kentucky Fried Chicken, where flour becomes airborne because of my celiac disease. I would be ill around the clock. That would be terrible. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.